A shooting rampage in Washington, D.C., a gun battle in Chicago, and a military-like assault in Nairobi. 1 week, 3 horrific events, leaving scores dead. Are more guns to blame, or could they be the solution? Owning guns, rights and responsibility. That's next on The Line. Welcome to On the Line. I'm Doug Bernard, in for Aisha Tanzim. Washington, D.C.'s Navy Yard is a secure military installation, just a little more than 1 mile from the U.S. Capitol building. There are gates and guards, and you need a pass just to enter. And all of that wasn't enough to stop Aaron Alexis from walking on base last Monday and shooting 12 victims dead before being shot himself. Hardly 3 days later, this time in Chicago, another shooting by a gunman left 13 wounded, some of them critically. Large mass shootings aren't unique to the United States, but the U.S. does seem to stand head above shoulders in their frequency. The rights and responsibilities of guns on our program today, owning guns, rights and responsibilities. We want to welcome our panel joining us here today. First up here in studio is Larry Pratt. Mr. Pratt is Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. That's a firearms rights advocacy group. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, good to be with you, Doug.
And also joining us via Skype from Boston, Massachusetts is John Rosenthal. Mr. Rosenthal is the founder of Stop Handgun Violence. That's a nonprofit group working to prevent firearm violence. Welcome to you both on the line.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with a question for both of you, and first to you, Mr. Pratt, perhaps maybe in an effort to try and find some common ground to begin. Tell me a little bit about your experience with firearms.
Well, I've been representing Gun Owners of America, lobbying the Congress for well over 3 decades. And that's most of my experience with firearms. I do have firearms. I do, when I can, go shooting, but typically on a weekend I'm traveling and giving a talk rather than doing what I'd really like to do out on some rural land that I have shooting.
So, I mean, how long have you been an active shooter?
Oh, I would say since my 20s, so half a century or so.
And John Rosenthal, tell me a little bit about your experience with firearms as well.
Sure. I'm a gun owner. I love to skeet shoot. I mostly love sporting clays and sport shooting. I've done a little bit of hunting. And I got involved in the gun violence prevention issue back in 1995 when I realized that roughly 19 kids or 15 kids under 19 were dying every day. 106 Americans in 1995 died every single day from firearms. That's close to 40,000 Americans. And as a gun owner, I thought, this is crazy. I mean, how is this happening? And what I realized is there really aren't hardly any uniform national laws addressing gun violence prevention anyway. There's certainly laws allowing for unrestricted access to guns. And I set out I built the biggest billboard in America on the Mass Pike, just drawing attention to the issue of gun violence and so many kids dying. And then we enacted legislation here in Massachusetts. We're an urban industrial state, and we have the lowest firearm fatality rate year after year per 100,000 population.
So it seems clear,
in the nation.
Sure. Now it seems clear that both of you are familiar, comfortable around firearms. So a question to you, and again, Mr. Rosenthal, how could the Navy Yard shootings and the shootings in Chicago just a few days later been prevented from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, again, as a gun owner, I can pass a background check, and I have no problem buying guns from federally licensed gun dealers who have to run a background check. I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment, and I would fight hard to protect that amendment, just like I fight hard to reduce injuries and deaths from guns. But in 33 states, you can buy guns without a background check from private dealers and at gun shows and on the internet. And so there's this horrible bifurcated system where if you're a law-abiding gun owner, you're going to go to a gun store, you can pass a background check and get a gun. But if you're a criminal, the mentally ill, or even an international terrorist, you can go to any one of these 33 states and thousands of gun shows and buy guns from private individuals, cash and carry, no ID or background check. So one of the things that happened that I think everyone needs to recognize, after Sandy Hook, the NRA and Gun Owners of America talked about arming schools as the solution to gun violence. But look, that military base like Fort Hood was armed, heavily armed, and it couldn't do a thing against a armed person with intent and maybe the desire, well, certainly the element of surprise and the desire maybe to die by cop. But nonetheless, the solution is not arming every place. I think the solution is really accountability and responsibility, that everyone should undergo a background check, whether you buy a gun from a dealer or a private individual, and mental health records should be included in that system.
So background checks, or perhaps strengthening background checks, would be a provision that you're suggesting. I'm turning to you, Mr. Pratt, for your ideas as to how these shootings could have been prevented. But at first, I'd actually like to clarify for our audience. There's a lot of talk about Second Amendment. We'll hear a lot of that today. So the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution reads exactly like this. It says, a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of the free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. Actually, the commas have been a subject of some legal debate. So, Larry Pratt, that is the Second Amendment. This right is enshrined in the Constitution. So how could these shootings, let's say the Navy Yard and Chicago, been prevented?
The truth of the matter is, Doug, the Navy Yard was not well armed. They had guards, and they were mowed down by the killer on his way in. 2 guys, 2 badges, easily identified as the only people in his way with a gun. Everybody else on the base, other than the MPs, no guns at all. And that's been that way since President Clinton was reinforced by President Bush. So there's not a military base in the United States of America where the officers and troops are able to have guns. They have to wait to go home and be off duty before they can go target practicing. No guns on base.
This seems like a key point. Who in the United States can buy a gun, and who can they buy it from?
Well, the killer in the Navy Yard bought his gun passing a background check. Our argument has been all along that restrictions mainly burden law-abiding people, and criminals either can go through the background check the way the Navy Yard killer did, or they get their guns by stealing them or some other way. So rather than try to control people's activity, which you end up controlling the good guys, better to enable the good guys to be able to defend themselves. Had there been people carrying concealed firearms on that base, which would have been illegal, then they could have shot back and arguably stopped the killer a lot sooner.
Let me challenge each of you. Mr. Pratt, we heard from Mr. Rosenthal that, one prescription would be sort of more rigorous, more enhanced background checks. And we now know that the shooter at the Washington Navy Yard had a history of assaults, of police problems, and of mental health issues. Wouldn't a more rigorous background check have weeded him out and prevented him from getting a gun to go do what he did?
It might have prevented him from getting a gun in a store. It wouldn't arguably have prevented him from getting a gun. Washington, D.C. was a gun-free zone for years, and yet that didn't keep criminals from getting guns. I think the only way we're going to get out of this problem is recognize that all of our mass murders for the last 20 years in the United States of America have occurred in gun-free zones, be they schools, malls that were posted no guns, theaters that were posted no guns. It was interesting in Aurora, Colorado, where there was a mass murder in a theater. The killer walked by 6 theaters until he found the 7th one that said no guns.
John Rosenthal, we only have about a minute or so before the break, but your thoughts, if more rigorous background checks are the solution. You know, there are about 88 to 90 guns for every 100 people in the United States. We're swimming in guns. How will more rigorous background checks really solve the problem?
Well, it's just common sense, Brad. More guns lead to more gun violence. And if you look at the states with comprehensive or tougher gun laws like Massachusetts compared to states with lax gun laws like Texas and Alaska and Louisiana, what you see is a pattern year after year. There are more gun deaths in the states with lax gun laws, less gun deaths in the states with comprehensive or tougher gun laws. It makes no sense to have a state like Massachusetts, where you have tougher gun laws and lower firearm fatality rates, but yet we border Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, who are among the 33 states that don't even require a background check or proof of ID for anyone other than who goes to a gun store, so all private gun dealers. So the system is set up for unrestricted access to guns without detection, because the gun owners of America and the NRA believe that everyone should be armed and that an armed society is a safer society. That just isn't true, and I think it's just common sense to require anyone that wants a firearm that they pass a background check. What Larry didn't tell you was that roughly 40% of guns sold each year are sold by private gun dealers, either at gun shows or out of backpacks and car trunks, legally without proof of ID or a background check. So the system is set up to arm criminals and the mentally ill and even Al-Qaeda terrorists who come to this country to buy guns without detection. And that is why we have a gun violence epidemic in this country that leads to 87 deaths a day, roughly 30,000+ every single year. A classroom like Newtown is emptied every 3 days, and 20,000 Americans have died just since the Sandy Hook massacre last December.
Mr. Rosenthal, we're going to have to take a quick short break, but we're coming back. And when we come back, what this week's assault on an upscale mall in Nairobi may say about the global problems of firearms violence.
Voice of America. 1,500 hours
of news and information.
Educational and cultural programming to more than 134 million people
worldwide each week.
Listen to us on radio.
Watch us on television.
Follow us on Facebook or Twitter.
And through your mobile device. VOA.
We're dynamic
and consistent
in bringing you
the most reliable information in 43 languages.
Tune in.
Tune in.
Stopping, or at least slowing, the tide of deadly mass shootings, our topic today. Let's welcome back our guests here in studio. Larry Pratt, he's Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, and John Rosenthal, the founder of Stop Handgun Violence. Now, this week brought another unfolding horror as militants attacked an upscale shopping mall in Nairobi, Kenya, killing scores. Clearly, there are significant differences between an attack like this and the sorts that we recently saw in the United States. But gentlemen, I wonder if there are any similarities that might be helpful here. Larry Pratt, your thoughts?
Well, let's contrast the tragedy that occurred in Nairobi with a wannabe mass murderer that got started in a mall in Clackamas, Oregon last year. He took his gun into the mall. They had a no-guns policy, so I imagine he was thinking he'd be good to go. He did kill a couple of people, but also good to know there was another good guy with a gun. He was violating the mall policy, but he had his gun and he ran to the sound of the shots. When the killer saw him come with his gun in hand, he committed suicide, and the end of that. That did not become a mass murder because a good guy with a gun was at hand. And every time I hear of one of these mass murders, whether it was in D.C. or in Nairobi, these are quote-unquote gun-free zones.
John Rosenthal, I'm wondering your thoughts. I was talking with a colleague a little bit earlier today, and one of the topics that came up was the sense that, well, perhaps maybe we have it wrong. Maybe the problem, perhaps, isn't guns, but maybe it might be mental health. I mean, it seems that anybody who walks into any sort of public place and just starts shooting large numbers of people, that seems, is this perhaps a mental health issue that just happens to involve guns?
Well, Brad, I believe that the common denominator in all these mass shootings is the firearm. I mean, we've always had mental health problems in our families, in our country. I mean, it's an issue we have to address. I mean, at any given day, anyone can be mentally ill and snap. When you have a firearm easily accessible, it often turns, a teenage depression into a suicide with some irresponsible gun owner's gun that left it around unlocked, or it turns an argument, like a domestic argument, into a homicide. But I will tell you that the common denominator in all the mass shootings are typically high-capacity ammunition magazines. Remember, police officers are issued a service weapon with 13 to 17 rounds. When I go duck hunting, I'm limited to 3 rounds to protect the duck population. But there is no limit whatsoever on the number of high-capacity ammunition magazines you can carry or the size. And all of the shootings that have taken place, the ones that most people remember, the high-profile ones, are with typically semi-automatic pistols or long guns like the AR-15 made by Bushmaster and Cerberus Capital Management, who owns them, but also these large capacity ammunition clips, larger than law enforcement carry. And I think if we want to make our country safer, we shouldn't make it easily accessible for mentally ill people as well as criminals to buy higher-powered weaponry than our law enforcement carry. And I think if Larry were really honest, he would tell you that everyone should have an assault rifle and a high-capacity ammunition magazine, because that's what the military has and that's what police have. And we have to be able to fight a renegade government. And I just think that is a very outdated philosophy, and the founders never intended, I believe, to arm people without any kind of accountability, and certainly not military-style weapons, which are used in all these mass shootings.
Larry Pratt, should there be some limitations on firearms owner? Now, I mean, for example, you often hear the phrase a semi-automatic firearm. Well, you know what? If you buy a weapon these days, if you buy a firearm, chances are it's semi-automatic. It's not that unusual. But perhaps, as Mr. Rosenthal was just saying, you know, perhaps these large clips, you know, that you can get these large number of clips, 20, 30, however many. I mean, shouldn't there be some restrictions on ownership? You can't own a machine gun, for example. Should you be able to own a large, high-capacity clip?
Actually, you can own machine guns in many states. The fact of the matter is the founders never foresaw the very medium that we're using right now. Their lack of foresight for the technology hardly means that we then should be free to regulate it. I think this should be as unregulated as the Second Amendment. I can go into a theater, and I'm not allowed to yell fire, but I'm not given a muzzle when I go in. They're assuming that if I do something terrible like that, they're going to punish me afterwards. Same with firearms. Let's look at a state like Utah. For 10 years, they have made it legal for somebody that has a permit to carry a concealed firearm, is able to teach, able to be a principal, visit the school, no problem. And for 10 years that they've had that law, they have had no mass shootings at schools, although they did have one at a mall that said no guns.
The United States is often referred to as a gun culture, but we're not unique in that. I mean, there are tons of guns in Norway. There are tons of guns
Switzerland.
In Switzerland, absolutely, and Canada.
Which has a lower murder rate than all the rest of Europe.
So why is it, and first to you, Mr. Rosenthal, why is it that, you know, we have many guns, many other places in the world have guns? Your perspective as to why our overall per capita firearms homicide rate, which is about 3 per 100,000, is so high compared to developed countries?
Well, if you go to Switzerland, everybody has to go to the military. Everyone has to be trained, I should say, if they have a firearm, because there is no military. And their weapons are checked. Their ammunition is counted. So there's a lot more regulation on firearms in that country. And in our country, there is no federal law that requires a background check for criminals and terrorists and the mentally ill if they buy guns from private individuals. So what you have is a bunch of untrained, unqualified people who are buying guns undetected. And then even if you go to a gun store, the Congress, thanks to the gun lobby and the gun industry, has said that law enforcement, including the FBI, can't even maintain purchase records for more than 24 hours because Congress and the gun lobby says you can't trust law enforcement. So what we have is completely unrestricted access to guns in this country versus very heavily regulated guns in other countries. And I will tell you that they do not, our average is 10.6 firearm deaths per 100,000 population, and no country in the world matches that.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Pratt.
Truth be told, the violence in America occurs primarily in our urban areas. If you took some 19 cities out of our crime data where they have the most restrictions on firearms owners, then our country becomes more peaceful than Switzerland.
But if we separate out, there's a difference between person-on-person violence with a handgun and what we're specifically looking at, which are these mass shootings, these mass horrific shootings. I mean, President Obama just...
They don't occur in Wyoming, where you can carry a gun without the government's permission, concealed.
So we have very little time left. Where do you think, gentlemen, the common ground is in this debate? Mr. Rosenthal, where is the common ground moving forward?
I think that we all have to recognize there's a right to keep and bear arms, but with that come responsibilities and accountability on the part of gun owners to lock their guns, gun dealers to operate out of a bona fide store, not backpacks and car trunks, gun manufacturers to build safety features into their guns. Right now, they're exempt from any Consumer Product Safety Commission, unlike toy guns that have a red dot at the end of the barrel. That's a federal regulation.
Mr. Rosenthal, I hate to stop you there.
150 shot a day have no regulation, so that's where you start.
All right, Larry Pratt, some final thoughts?
Well, America's going to continue to have a problem with people abusing firearms, and it's going to continue to be in the areas where we've disarmed the good guys. When you open up the numbers and you look to see what's really going on, you see that even nationally, even when you include our urban city data, firearms are used 4 to 5 times more often each day in self-defense than they are in criminal uses. And so the idea that we're somehow going to be safer by more restrictions is just not true.
I hate to wrap it here, I hate to wrap it here, gentlemen, but I do have a sickening feeling that we're going to be revisiting this topic again in the near future. Well, we're leaving it there. Thanks so much for our guests today. Larry Pratt, he's Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, and also thanks to John Rosenthal joining us by Skype. He's the founder of Stop Handgun Violence. Thank you so much for joining us today. You can send us your questions or comments and watch our past show as well, all on our website, voanews.com/ontheline. We look forward to hearing from you in the future, and we hope you'll join us again next week for another episode of On the Line.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Presto, a VOA reporter here in Washington. I often cover science and technology, and I'm standing here outside NASA headquarters because I love to cover U.S. Space Agency missions, and that includes NASA's robotic explorer on Mars, the Curiosity rover. Now, robotic engineers have to start somewhere, and I met up with high school students who design, build, and compete their own robots. Check this out. It has the energy of a professional sporting event. But the teenage competitors are not on the playing field themselves. They're battling robots they've built in an event that celebrates students' brains and robotic brawn. Frisbee flinging, point scoring, opponent blocking,
15 seconds left.
Tower climbing robots. More than 50,000 students around the world are participating in this year's competition, with high school students from the eastern U.S. and overseas represented at the meet in Washington. Guilherme Lima is a member of the team Brazilian Machine.
I have the opportunity to come here to the USA and compete in this. Amazing.
There's competition, but also cooperation, says Shaked Kadar of the Thunderbolts team from Israel.
We have a team that came to Israel last year, and we hosted them. So this year we met them. They're right here in the pit next to us, and they're helping us, and they really love them.
The Thunderbolts mentor, Ali Barak, says the competition is about more than building robots.
Everybody think about robots. In a matter of fact, we build people here. And the whole idea of setting up priorities, deciding what to do, what to give up, this is like really the learning experience for the kids.
On the court, 3 teams form an alliance, red or blue, and those alliances shift during qualifying matches. Alliance mates become opponents, a switch that promotes good sportsmanship.
That is awesome.
It takes a lot of work to make it to a match. Students had just 6 weeks to design, program, and build their robots.
When one's here, the other one should just be waiting on top.
The Woodrow Wilson High School team in Washington, called Tiger Pride, won last year's regional competition and worked hard this year to defend its title. Each team receives the same kit of components. Woodrow Wilson's Sohrab Hasakani says the rest is up to the students.
Before this, I barely knew what a screw was, didn't even know what a nut or a bolt was. Now I have to help make all these things and help with all my ideas and stuff.
Mentor Jeff Wetzel of DC Robotics says the students must use math, science, and creativity.
Having the kids have smiles on their face when we leave and be puzzled and confused and overcome that, and to see them work through a problem and come to a solution, that makes me happy.
The competition fuels excitement about science and technology.
I really like learning about mechanics of robotics, and I think it's important that girls especially get involved in engineering.
Wilson High's Tiger Pride did not reclaim victory this year, but all is not lost.
Well, we just take it back to the school and then we wait for an off-season event.
And there are celebrations for the international teams, as the Brazilian Machine and Israel's Thunderbolts each earned a spot in the World Championship. Suzanne Presto, VOA News, Washington.
Americans love sports. Football, basketball, baseball, and tennis. So sometimes American English uses sports to describe something.
Now the ball is in your court.
But what exactly are they talking about?
Hey, I heard that Sam asked you to go to dinner with him. Are you going to go? He's so cute. I don't know. Well, it sounds like the ball is in your court now.
Sounds like somebody needs to make a decision or take some action. When somebody tells you the ball is in your court, it means the next decision or action is up to you. Like a tennis match. If the ball's in your court, you have an option to hit the ball or let the ball go right by you. This is a strong expression, and it's usually used when a decision needs to be made soon. And that's English in a Minute.